The Thanksgiving turkey sat golden and gleaming, its skin crackling in the silence that followed my mother-in-law's declaration. "You're not family," she'd said, her manicured finger pointing at me like a weapon. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably, forks suspended midair. My phone buzzed against my thigh, an email from my lawyer. Secondary sale closed. $45 million had just hit the escrow account. I smiled, slow and deliberate. If I wasn't family, then tonight I'd act like what I truly was, a controlling shareholder. My name is Ava Carter, and until 3 minutes ago, I was trying to salvage what remained of this Thanksgiving dinner. The kitchen timer read 6:43 p.m., its digital glow cutting through the amber warmth of my mother-in-law's dining room in Maple Ridge, Pennsylvania. I'd spent the entire afternoon helping prepare this feast, basting the 20-pound turkey, whipping cream for the pumpkin pie, arranging autumn leaves around the centerpiece, all while Marjorie Carter supervised with the critical eye of a general inspecting troops. The smell of sage and butter should have been comforting. Instead, it clung to my throat like a premonition. I watched my husband Ethan carve the turkey, his movements precise but tense, the electric knife humming through white meat while avoiding his mother's gaze. Douglas, his father, sat at the far end of the table, already 2 bourbons deep, his silence as heavy as the mahogany furniture surrounding us. "Pass the cranberry sauce," Marjorie commanded, not asked, her voice cutting through the murmur of extended family, cousins, aunts, Ethan's sister Jessica with her perfect children, all of them arranged around the table like pieces on a chessboard where Marjorie always played white and always moved first. I reached for the crystal bowl, my fingers trembling slightly not from nervousness, but from the effort of maintaining composure. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of these dinners, 5 years of being reminded in subtle and not so subtle ways that I didn't quite measure up. My sin being a data engineer at a tech company instead of coming from old money, working for a salary instead of living off trust funds and country club connections. "You know," Marjorie began, and I knew that tone, that silk-wrapped razor blade voice she used before drawing blood. "Jessica was just telling me about the Pemberton wedding last month. Such a lovely affair. All the right families were there." She paused, letting her eyes drift to me. "Of course, they only invited actual family members, blood relations and those who've properly married in." The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan's hand stilled on the carving knife. "Mom," he said quietly, a warning she chose to ignore. "What, I'm simply making conversation." Marjorie's smile was arctic. "After all, some of us understand the importance of lineage, real family. Not everyone who sits at this table has earned that distinction." My phone vibrated against my leg. Once, twice, 3 times. Urgent. "Excuse me," I murmured, pulling it out just enough to glimpse the screen. "Nadia Brooks, my attorney." Subject line, "Transfer complete. Immediate attention required." "How rude," Marjorie announced to the table. Checking her phone during Thanksgiving dinner. This is what I mean about people who weren't raised properly. No sense of occasion, no respect for tradition. I set the phone down, screen dark against the white tablecloth, and met her gaze directly. "I apologize. Please, continue telling everyone how I don't belong here." The silence that followed was exquisite. Forks stopped moving. Jessica's youngest held a dinner roll suspended halfway to his mouth. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause its ticking. Marjorie straightened, her Hermes scarf catching the light. "Well, since you're being direct, yes. You don't belong here. You're not family. You're an employee with a ring. Nothing more. This table, this house, this tradition, it's built on generations of Carters who understood their place in society. You," she laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "You're just visiting." The irony of Marjorie's words wasn't lost on me as I sat there, feeling the weight of my phone against my leg. 5 years ago, when I joined Blue Raven Analytics, I was employee number 47. the company was nothing more than a Series A startup operating out of a converted warehouse in Philadelphia, all exposed brick and dreams of disrupting the analytics industry. My starting salary was $62,000, decent for a junior engineer, but nothing that would impress the country club set in Maple Ridge. What Marjorie never knew, what I never bothered to explain during her condescending lectures about real careers, was that I'd negotiated something far more valuable than salary: equity. Specifically, options for 320,000 shares at 14 cents each, vesting over 4 years. I'd exercised early, filing my 83B election within 30 days, paying taxes on paper gains that didn't exist yet because I believed in what we were building. That belief cost me $45,000 in taxes that first year, money I didn't have, money I borrowed, money that meant driving a 10-year-old Honda while Marjorie made snide comments about Ethan marrying down. It meant shopping at outlet stores while she gifted Jessica's children designer clothes I couldn't afford for the children Ethan and I were waiting to have. It meant smile after smile after smile while she introduced me at garden parties as Ethan's wife. She works with computers or something. The early days at Blue Raven were brutal. 16-hour days building data pipelines, debugging code at 3 a.m., living on takeout and ambition. My hands would cramp from typing. My eyes burned from staring at screens. But every line of code was building something, not just a product, my future, our future. While Marjorie hosted charity luncheons where women complained about their decorators, I was architecting systems that would process billions of data points in real time. Year 2 brought Series B funding. Our valuation jumped to $200 million. My shares, fully vested now, were worth $3 each on paper. Still illiquid, still theoretical, but growing. Marjorie, of course, remained unimpressed. "Paper money isn't real money," she'd said at Easter dinner, while explaining how Douglas's family's wealth stretched back 4 generations. "Real wealth is in land, in bonds, in things you can touch." 2. By year 3, I'd been promoted to senior engineer, then lead, then director of product analytics. My salary had climbed to $130,000, but more importantly, I'd been granted additional options, another 200,000 shares at the new strike price of $4. I exercised those too, paying more taxes on phantom gains while Marjorie questioned why we couldn't afford to vacation in Martha's Vineyard like proper families. What she didn't see were the equity spreadsheets I updated monthly, calculating and recalculating as our valuation climbed. Series C, $800 million. Series D, $2 billion. My combined shares, 520,000 after the refresher grants climbing in value like a rocket hidden in my laptop, invisible to anyone who judged worth by outward appearances. Last month, the email arrived that would change everything. Harbor Point Equity, a secondary market fund, was offering to buy employee shares at $14.10 each. Clean cash, immediate liquidity, no waiting for an IPO that might never come. The calculation was simple: 520,000 shares times 14.10 equals $7,332,000. After long-term capital gains tax, roughly $45 million. But I didn't sell immediately. No, I waited. I scheduled the transaction for this week specifically. The papers signed, the escrow arranged, everything timed to close at 6:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thanksgiving Day. Because if 5 years of condescension had taught me anything, it was that timing isn't just everything, it's the only thing that separates revenge from justice. The secondary sale opportunity had arrived 3 weeks ago, wrapped in legalese and NDAs. I was sitting in my home office at 11:15 p.m., reviewing quarterly analytics reports, when the email from Harbor Point Equity landed in my inbox. They were discreet, professional, targeting early employees of high-growth companies, offering liquidity before the traditional exit events. The subject line was innocuous: confidential investment opportunity for Blue Raven Analytics stakeholders. My lawyer, Nadia Brooks, was the first person I called, not Ethan. That conversation would come later, after I'd mapped out every angle, every possibility, every legal protection. Nadia operated out of a boutique firm in Philadelphia, specialized in equity transactions and securities law. She'd handled dozens of secondary sales, and more importantly, she understood the art of strategic timing. "The offer is solid," she'd said during our initial consultation, her voice crisp over the conference line. $14.10 per share is actually above market for a company at Blue Raven's stage. But here's what's interesting. The closing date is flexible. "We can structure this however you want." That's when the plan began to crystallize. Not just a sale, but a precisely orchestrated transfer of power. Nadia helped me establish a 10b5-1 trading plan, a predetermined selling arrangement that would protect me from any accusations of insider trading. Every detail was documented, filed, notarized. The shares would transfer from my account to Harbor Point's custody via Northfield Trust Escrow, with funds releasing upon confirmation of clear title. But the masterstroke wasn't the stock sale. It was what I discovered while researching Marjorie's background for my own protection. You see, I'd learned to be thorough, to investigate every angle, skills that served me well in data engineering and even better in dealing with adversaries. Public records are beautiful things. Property deeds, business filings, UCC statements, all available to anyone who knows where to look. Carter Atelier LLC, Marjorie's boutique clothing store in downtown Maple Ridge, was hemorrhaging money. The public face was all Success charity fashion shows, society photographs, glossy mentions in the local lifestyle magazine. But the UCC filings told a different story. A $2 million loan from Meridian Commercial Bank, personally guaranteed by Douglas, secured by both the commercial property and, critically, their personal residence. The loan had been modified twice, payment schedules extended, interest rates adjusted, classic signs of distress. The most recent filing, dated 6 weeks ago, showed the loan had been sold, not to another bank, but to Bayfield Capital, a debt acquisition firm that specialized in distressed assets. They'd bought the note at a discount, probably 60 cents on the dollar, and were positioning for collection. The grace period expired in 10 days. I met with Thomas Reeves from Bayfield at a coffee shop in Philadelphia, far from Maple Ridge's gossip network. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone in debt collection sharpsuit, sharper smile, utterly transactional. "The note's available for assignment," he'd said, stirring sugar into his espresso. "We bought it at 60% of face value. We'd sell at 75. That's $1.5 million cash. And you own the paper. Full rights to collect, modify, or enforce." "What about a forbearance agreement?" I'd asked. "If I wanted to maintain the debt but adjust terms." His smile widened. "That's entirely at the holder's discretion. You could demand full payment, extend terms, or," he paused meaningfully, "require specific performance conditions. As long as they're legal, courts will enforce them." The paperwork for the assignment was even simpler than the stock sale. A wire transfer to Bayfield, a notarized assignment document, and suddenly I would hold $2 million of debt personally guaranteed by my in-laws, secured by everything they owned. The same woman who said I wasn't family would owe her financial survival to my discretion. Nadia reviewed the forbearance agreement I'd drafted. It was elegant in its simplicity. Monthly payments would continue as scheduled. No acceleration of the debt, as long as certain behavioral conditions were met. Respect for my marriage. No public disparagement. Acknowledgement of my place in the family. Violation of any condition would trigger immediate acceleration, full payment due within 30 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. "This is completely enforceable," Nadia had confirmed. "Though I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this?" I thought about 5 years of subtle cruelties, of being introduced as Ethan's wife, never by name, of being excluded from family portraits, of overhearing Marjorie tell her friends that Ethan could do better when this phase passes. "Schedule both closings for Thanksgiving," I'd said. 6:45 p.m. Eastern exactly. The moral weight of what I was planning hit me 2 nights before Thanksgiving. Ethan was in the shower, and I sat on our bed, laptop open, staring at the signed documents that would transform me from overlooked daughter-in-law to financial puppet master. The forbearance agreement glowed on the screen, each clause a carefully constructed cage. When Ethan emerged, towel around his waist, he found me crying, not the pretty tears of movie heroines, but ugly, gulping sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. "Hey, hey," he said, sitting beside me, pulling me close. His skin smelled like cedarwood soap. "What's wrong?" I showed him everything: the stock sale documents, the assignment of note, the forbearance agreement with its behavioral conditions. I watched his face cycle through confusion, shock, and finally, a deep sadness that made me want to tear it all up. 45 million, he whispered. "Ava, that's... Jesus. That's not the part I need you to understand," I said. "Look at the other documents." He read through the loan assignment, his face paling as he recognized his parents' address, the boutique's location, the personal guarantee with his father's signature. When he reached the forbearance agreement, his hands started shaking. "You bought their debt. You're going to..." "What? Foreclose on my parents if my mother doesn't apologize." "Only if she violates the terms," I said carefully. "Ethan, she's cruel to me. Systematically, deliberately cruel, and you never stop her." That hit home. He set the laptop aside, ran his hands through his still damp hair. "I know she's difficult." "Difficult?" I stood up, pacing to the window. "She told your cousin's wife that she's waiting for you to come to your senses." She introduced me at the hospital gala as the girl Ethan's seeing after 4 years of marriage. She scheduled your family reunion on my birthday and then acted surprised when I mentioned it. "But this," he gestured at the screen, "this is financial warfare. This is destroying them." "No," I said firmly. "This is protection. The debt exists whether I own it or Bayfield Capital does. At least with me. They get reasonable terms. All she has to do is treat me with basic respect. If that's too high a price for $2 million of forbearance, then maybe I should let Bayfield handle it." We argued until 2 a.m., voices low to avoid waking the neighbors, but fierce with conviction. Ethan's position was forgiveness, rising above, being the better person. Mine was simpler respect is earned, but it can also be demanded when all other options fail. "She'll never forgive this," he said finally. "Even if you never use it, just knowing you have this power, it'll poison everything." "Everything's already poisoned," I replied. "I'm just choosing the antidote." The next morning, I met with Patricia Wong, a family therapist who specialized in financial dynamics. Not for therapy for perspective. Her office smelled like lavender and leather-bound books, a sanctuary of neutral colors and careful phrases. "What you're describing," she said after I'd laid out the situation, "is financial abuse through social humiliation. Your mother-in-law uses her economic status as a weapon to maintain hierarchy. You're essentially proposing to flip that hierarchy." "Is that wrong?" I asked. "Wrong is a moral judgment I can't make for you. But consider this power obtained through coercion rarely yields genuine respect. It might get you compliance. But at what cost to your marriage, to your own sense of self?" I thought about that question through the entire drive home. Was I becoming the thing I hated, using money as a cudgel to beat respect out of someone who would never genuinely give it? But then I remembered last Christmas, when Marjorie gave Jessica's children iPads and gave me a $25 gift card to Target. I remembered the wedding anniversary dinner where she'd seated me at the children's table, by mistake. I remembered every slight, every cut, every moment Ethan had stood silent while his mother drew blood with words. That evening, as I confirmed the final wire instructions with Nadia, Ethan came to my office. "If you do this," he said quietly, "promise me something." "What?" "Use it only if she crosses the line tomorrow, not for past sins, not for accumulated grudges. Only if she does something unforgivable at dinner." I looked at my husband. this good man who still believed his mother capable of kindness, and nodded. Only if she crosses the line. He kissed my forehead and left. I turned back to my laptop and typed one final email to Nadia. Proceed with both transactions as scheduled. 6:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. No delays. The moral line was drawn. Tomorrow, Marjorie would choose which side to stand on. The dining room erupted after Marjorie's declaration that I wasn't family. Jessica's youngest started crying, sensing the violence in the emotional atmosphere even if he couldn't understand the words. Douglas poured himself another bourbon, his hand trembling slightly. The cousins exchanged glances, that particular mix of discomfort and anticipation that comes from witnessing someone else's family drama. "Mom, that's enough," Ethan said, his voice carrying a warning that had never worked before and wouldn't work now. "Enough!" Marjorie's laugh tinkled like crystal shards. "I haven't even started. Do you know what Eleanor Hastings asked me at the club last week? She wanted to know if it was true that my daughter-in-law worked in customer service." Customer service. Because that's what she heard from the Pemberton girl who met Ava at some terrible conference downtown. "I told her I was in data engineering," I said quietly. She chose to hear what she wanted. "Data engineering, customer service, typing pool, it's all the same thing. Isn't it wage work? Hourly labor dressed up with fancy titles?" Marjorie stood, moving to the sideboard where the wine decanter caught the light like liquid rubies. "Real families, established families, don't work for other people. They own, they invest, they build legacies, not spreadsheets." My phone buzzed again, then again, a cascade of notifications that I could feel through the table. 6:45 p.m. Exactly. "For God's sake, turn that thing off," Marjorie snapped. "This is exactly what I mean. No sense of occasion, no respect for—" I stood up, the chair scraping against hardwood. "Excuse me for one moment. If you leave this table—" "What?" I turned back, meeting her gaze directly. "I won't be family. You've already made that abundantly clear." I walked to the powder room, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. The emails were all there, lined up like soldiers from Northfield Trust escrow. Wire transfer confirmed. 45,000 wire deposited to account ending in 4429. From Harbor Point Equity. Secondary sale complete. 520,000 shares of Blue Raven Analytics successfully transferred. From Nadia Brooks. Assignment of note executed. Congratulations. You are now the legal holder of the Meridian Commercial Bank Loan 2019 CC 4471 from Bayfield Capital. Transfer complete. All rights, title, and interest in the aforementioned debt obligation have been assigned to Ava Carter, LLC. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened my briefcase. I'd hidden it in the powder room earlier, knowing this moment would come. Inside were the printed documents, notarized and sealed, the assignment of note, the forbearance agreement, personalized with Marjorie and Douglas's names, the bank statements showing the missed payments, the violation of covenants, the current default status that Bayfield had been preparing to act on. I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked different somehow, not triumphant, not vengeful, just resolved, like a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor, knowing it would hurt but heal. When I returned to the dining room, Marjorie was mid-monologue, regaling the table with a story about how some people didn't understand the difference between new money and real wealth. She didn't even pause when I sat down. And I told Eleanor, I said, "Well, what can you expect? When someone comes from nothing, they think any little achievement makes them special. A salary, a title, a cheap ring." "Marjorie," I said, my voice cutting through her words like a blade through silk. She stopped, more from surprise than obedience. I never interrupted her, never challenged her in front of the family. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." "How dare you!" I placed the first document on the table, the assignment of note, heavy with its official seals. "As of 6:45 this evening, I own your debt. The $2 million loan on Carter Atelier, the one Douglas personally guaranteed, the one secured by this house. The room went silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, 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 like a countdown. Douglas's bourbon glass slipped from his hand, amber liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like an accusation. "That's impossible," Marjorie whispered, but her face had gone the color of old parchment. "Bayfield Capital was happy to sell," I continued, pulling out the forbearance agreement. "They were planning to accelerate the loan next week. Did you know you missed 3 payments that you violated the minimum revenue covenant 4 months ago?" "You're lying." But her voice cracked on the second word. I pulled out my phone, showed her the email from Northfield Trust. $45 million. That's what my Blue Raven equity was worth. The typing pool paid off rather well. Jessica gasped. One of the cousins whispered, "Holy shit," before his mother elbowed him. Ethan sat frozen, his face a map of warring emotions. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady as a metronome. "You're going to apologize. Right now, in front of everyone, you're going to acknowledge that I am, in fact, family. And then you're going to sign this forbearance agreement." I spread the forbearance agreement across the table, careful to avoid the spreading bourbon stain. The document was elegant in its simplicity, 3 pages of terms that would redefine the power structure of the Carter family. "Let me explain the terms," I said, pulling out my reading glasses a theatrical touch, but I wanted to savor every word. "The loan continues at current payment schedules, no acceleration, no foreclosure proceedings, as long as the following conditions are met." Marjorie's hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white as bone china. "Condition 1. Public acknowledgement of my status as a full family member, with all rights and considerations thereof. This includes but is not limited to family portraits, estate planning discussions, and holiday arrangements." Jessica pulled her children closer, as if the legal documents might be contagious. "Condition 2. No public or private disparagement of my career, education, background, or character. This includes conversations at the Maple Ridge Country Club, which," I smiled slightly, "I'll be applying to join next week." "You wouldn't dare," Marjorie breathed. "With $45 million, I think they'll overlook my lack of pedigree." Condition 3. Written apology to be delivered within 24 hours, acknowledging specific instances of disrespect and committing to behavioral change. Douglas finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Ava, this is extortion." "No," I corrected, pulling out another document. "This is the current market price for respect. Bayfield Capital wouldn't have offered you any forbearance at all. They were planning to accelerate the loan, force a sale, and take the house by New Year's. I'm offering you a way to keep everything your home, your business, your reputation. All I'm asking in return is basic human dignity. And if we refuse," Marjorie's voice had lost its crystal clarity, becoming something raw and frightened, "then I act as any rational debt holder would. The loan is already in default. I file for immediate payment of the full balance $2 million due within 30 days. When you can't pay, which we all know you can't, I foreclose. The boutique closes, the house goes to auction, and everyone in Maple Ridge will know that the great Carter family fortune was a facade." I pulled out my phone, showed them the Bayfield Capital correspondence. "They did their research. Your liquid assets total maybe $300,000. The house has a mortgage. The boutique loses $40,000 a month. You're living on credit and reputation. Marjorie. And I own both now." The silence stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. The turkey sat forgotten, congealing on its platter. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows that made everyone look haunted. "This is about revenge," Marjorie said finally. "About hurting me." "No," I said softly. "Revenge would be doing to you what you've done to me. 5 years of systematic humiliation. 5 years of being erased, diminished, dismissed. Revenge would be calling Eleanor Hastings right now and telling her about your financial situation. Revenge would be posting the foreclosure notice in the club newsletter." I stood, gathering the documents into a neat stack. "This is about choice, your choice. Sign the agreement, treat me with respect, and keep your life intact, or don't, and face the same consequences any other defaulted borrower would face." "Ethan," Marjorie turned to her son, tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. "Are you going to let her do this to your mother?" Ethan looked at me, then at his mother, then at the documents on the table. "Mom, she owns the debt legally. She could have let Bayfield destroy you without warning. Instead, she's offering you terms." Terms. Marjorie's composure finally cracked completely. "She's offering me humiliation." "I'm offering you exactly what you've given me," I said. "A place at this table, conditional on behavior. The only difference is my conditions are in writing." Douglas reached for the forbearance agreement with shaking hands. "Let me read this properly." "Take your time," I said, sitting back down. "But the offer expires at 8 p.m. After that, I let my lawyers handle everything." As Douglas read, muttering about specific clauses, I watched Marjorie's face cycle through emotions: rage, fear, calculation, and finally, a cold assessment I recognized from every business negotiation I'd ever witnessed. She was weighing costs versus benefits, pride versus survival. "The apology," she said finally. "What exactly would it need to say?" "The truth," I replied. "That you've been deliberately cruel, that you've tried to exclude me from the family, that you were wrong. And if I sign this, if I apologize, you'll maintain the current loan terms, as long as you maintain the behavioral terms." "Yes." She looked around the table at Jessica's shocked face, at the cousins recording everything on their phones, at Douglas still reading with a banker's attention to detail. The audience she'd cultivated for my humiliation had become witnesses to her capitulation. "I need a pen," she said quietly. I handed Marjorie my Mont Blanc pen, a gift from Ethan on our first anniversary, back when such gestures still meant something untainted by his mother's poison. She took it with fingers that trembled like autumn leaves, and for a moment, I saw her age clearly. Beneath the Botox and careful makeup, she was a 63-year-old woman facing the dissolution of everything she'd built her identity upon. "Before you sign," I said, "the apology. Now, to everyone here." She looked up at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not the theatrical gasps when someone used the wrong fork at dinner, but the primitive terror of someone watching their world restructure itself. She started, then stopped, cleared her throat. The cousins had stopped even pretending to eat, their phones held low but recording. Jessica's children watched with the fascination of kids seeing adult authority crumble. Marjorie stood slowly, one hand on the table for support. The dining room's chandelier cast her in harsh light, revealing every line she'd spent thousands trying to erase. "I owe Ava an apology," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Louder," I said. "Everyone should hear this." She flinched but raised her voice. "I owe Ava an apology. I have been—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Unkind. Deliberately unkind." "Specific instances," I prompted, my voice gentle but implacable. "The wedding anniversary dinner, the family portrait, the country club introduction." Each word seemed to cost her something vital. "I seated her at the children's table at our anniversary dinner. I excluded her from the family portrait last Christmas, telling her the photographer had already left when he hadn't. I introduced her to Eleanor Hastings as the girl Ethan is seeing after 4 years of marriage." Douglas made a sound part groan, part sigh. He hadn't known about all of it, I realized. Marjorie had been careful to perform her cruelties when he wasn't watching. "I told people she was in customer service when I knew she was a director at her company. I scheduled family events on her birthday. I gave her a $25 gift card for Christmas when I gave Jessica's husband a Rolex." The list continued, each admission drawing gasps from the assembled family. Some of these slights they'd witnessed but dismissed. Others were revelations. Marjorie's voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if confession carried its own momentum. "And tonight," she said, now looking directly at me, "I said Ava wasn't family. I said it to hurt her, to put her in her place, to remind her that I never wanted her at this table." The room held its breath. "I was wrong," Marjorie continued. "Ava is family. She's been family since the day she married my son. She's shown more patience with my behavior than I deserved, and more mercy tonight than I would have shown in her position." She sat back down, suddenly looking smaller in her chair. "Is that sufficient?" "One more thing," I said. "Tell me why you did it, the real reason." Marjorie's composure, already fractured, broke entirely. "Because I was afraid," she admitted, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "You were everything I wasn't. Self-made, successful on your own terms. Every accomplishment you achieved reminded me that I've never earned anything myself. The boutique loses money. The house is mortgaged. The only thing I had was the ability to make you feel small, and so I did, over and over, because if you were less than me, then I was still something." The confession hung in the air like incense, heavy and transformative. Jessica started crying quietly. One of the teenage cousins put down his phone, looking stunned. "Sign the agreement," I said quietly. Marjorie took the pen and signed her name on each page. Her signature, usually a flourish of loops and curves, reduced to a shaky scratch. Douglas signed as co-guarantor, his banker's hand still steady despite everything. I took the documents, checked each signature, then pulled out my phone. "Nadia, yes, they've signed. Please file with the county clerk's office first thing tomorrow morning." Turning back to the table, I stood one final time. "The terms are simple. Treat me with respect, include me as family, and the loan continues as structured. Violate any condition, and I accelerate the full balance immediately." "This isn't about revenge." "Marjorie, it's about balance. You held social power over me for 5 years. Now I hold financial power over you. The difference is, I'm offering you clearly defined terms for maintaining your dignity. That's more than you ever offered me." The kitchen timer went off at 7:15 p.m., its sharp ding cutting through the silence like a blade. The pumpkin pie was done. Such a mundane sound for such an extraordinary moment. The old order had ended, and a new one had begun, all between the turkey and dessert. I walked to the kitchen, pulled the pie from the oven, and set it on the cooling rack. The familiar domestic ritual felt surreal after what had just transpired. Through the doorway, I could see the dining room tableau frozen in awkward stillness, Marjorie staring at her hands. Douglas pouring another bourbon with mechanical precision, Jessica hushing her children's questions, the cousins texting furiously beneath the table. When I returned with the pie, Ethan stood up. "I think," he said carefully, "we should call it a night." "No," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "We finish dinner. We have pie. We act like a family. A real family this time." I cut the pie with steady hands, serving each person a slice, even Marjorie. The whipped cream peaked perfectly, a small triumph of normalcy. As I set Marjorie's plate in front of her, our eyes met. Hers were red-rimmed, defeated, but also, and this surprised me, relieved. The burden of maintaining her cruelty had been lifted, replaced by the simpler weight of contractual obligation. "The pie is excellent," Douglas said quietly. The first normal thing anyone had said in 20 minutes. "Thank you," I replied. "It's my grandmother's recipe. She always said the secret was adding a touch of bourbon to the filling." Douglas almost smiled. A wise woman. We ate in relative silence, but it wasn't the hostile silence of before. It was the quiet of people recalibrating, finding new positions in an altered landscape. Jessica's youngest asked if he could have seconds. One of the cousins complimented the crust. Small talk sprouted like grass through pavement, tentative but persistent. As people began to leave, offering awkward goodbyes and air kisses that didn't quite land, Marjorie approached me. We stood by the door. the November wind cutting through the entryway. "The wire confirmation," I said, pulling out my phone one last time. $45 million, cleared and available. I showed her the screen, the numbers stark against the white background. "This is what you called wage work. This is what you dismissed as not real money." She nodded slowly. "I suppose I'll need to update my definitions." "You'll need to update more than that." "Yes," she agreed. "I know." As she turned to walk to her room, I called after her. "Marjorie, the country club membership. When I apply next week, I'll need a sponsorship letter from an existing member." She stopped, her shoulders tensing. Then, without turning around, "I'll have it ready by Monday." The house emptied slowly. Douglas retreated to his study. Jessica bundled her children into their minivan, shooting me a look that was equal parts awe and terror. The cousins left in a cluster, already spinning the night into story, legend, myth. Finally, only Ethan and I remained in the dining room. The candles had burned low, wax pooling on the tablecloth. The turkey carcass looked like the remains of a battlefield. "You planned this for weeks," he said. It wasn't a question. "I planned this for years," I corrected. "The opportunity came 3 weeks ago. The execution was tonight." "And us?" he asked. "What happens to us?" I reached across the table, took his hand. "That depends. Can you live with what I've done? Can you see it not as cruelty, but as justice? Can you understand that I didn't destroy your mother? I saved her from Bayfield while saving myself from her." He squeezed my hand, thinking, "She'll never forgive this. You know that. She'll follow the terms, but she'll never forgive." "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm requiring respect. There's a difference." We sat there as the grandfather clock struck 8 p.m., then 8:30, then 9. Finally, Ethan stood, pulled me up with him. "Come on," he said. "Let's clean up." We cleared the table together, washing dishes side by side, the domestic rhythm slowly overriding the evening's drama. As I dried the last plate, I noticed the forbearance agreement still on the counter, Marjorie's signature drying into permanence. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and placed it in my briefcase next to the wire confirmation. $45 million and a signed contract. The typing pool girl had become the bank. The oven timer still showed 7:15 p.m., frozen at the moment the pie finished baking. I clicked it off, the digital display going dark. "You coming to bed?" Ethan asked from the doorway. "In a minute." I stood alone in Marjorie's kitchen. My kitchen now in a way it had never been before. Tomorrow would bring new dynamics, careful negotiations, the slow work of rebuilding relationships on different terms. But tonight, in this moment, I had something I'd never had at this table before: power, respect, and the absolute certainty that no one would ever again tell me I wasn't family. The ink on the signatures was still wet when I turned off the lights. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of sweet revenge, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Ava's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community special.